Hello there, and welcome back to the Codex. Today we're going to be talking about a full Sevagoth Prime Access loadout. Let's go ahead and hop into that. First off, I want to say, holy shit, does Sevagoth Prime look amazing. Look at this Prime design. This is with my colors currently on. Let's go look at the regular one. It is so good. This Prime is perhaps one of the best Prime skin releases that I've ever seen. Really fits the space pirate captain theme that they were going for, I think. Anyways, enough of that. Onward to the build. First, let's talk about the Archon Shards, because that's very important on this build. I will say, as a disclaimer, this build does lean pretty heavily on a high investment Archon Shard setup. But I think it's worth it because it's quite fun to use. So, we're using all Tau Forge. We're using 2 Tau Forge Blues for energy max. So that gives us 150 extra energy. Then we're using 3 Tau Forge for ability duration, so that gives us an extra 45% ability duration. Now, if we hop into the build here, the reason why both of those are important is because you can see, if we didn't have that extra 45% duration, we would only be at 40% duration right now. So thanks to those shards, we're at 85%. And because of the energy shards, and the fact that we don't have Prime Flow on, we still have 375 energy. So I'm not running Prime Flow, because it doesn't really fit in the build with the other mods that I want to run, and we'll go over that. And speaking of the duration, by the way, so the duration will actually go occasionally from 85% up to 116% because of multi-efficiency. This arcane gives you up to 36% ability duration as long as you have shields active. Speaking of shields, the survivability of this build is basically entirely dependent upon shields. Well, and crowd control. Shields and crowd control. Gloom, for example. And the companion, which we'll talk about later. So Prime Direction is on here because the amount of shields that you have, max shields, scales your shield gate, and we're using Pillage as our helmet ability. So if we hover over our shields here, the fact that we have 1,036 shields puts us near the shield gate cap, and that gives us 2.4 seconds of invulnerability, as in 2.4 seconds shield gate, when our shields break. So we take advantage of that extra long duration from running Prime Redirection, with having Pillage on to regenerate our shields on command, as well as be a very potent armor strip. Now, in terms of the other mods here, we're using both Shadow Haze and Dark Propagation because this is a ability nuking build. These two augments put together, long story short, make it so that when you combine Sow and Reap together, you'll automatically detonate the Sow on enemies, and when those enemies detonate, it'll create more shadows. The shadows will go out, and they'll attack more enemies that have Sow on them, and it just causes a cascade deaths, basically. It's highly effective. If you look at the actual augment here, it's the secondary part of Shadow Haze is what's important. A new shadow emerges from those enemies when they perish, and those enemies being ones affected by Death Harvest and the limit of 3 shadows, so this creates multiple shadows. And if you look at Dark Propagation, this says, enemies killed while inflicted with Sow spread its effects in a 15-meter radius. Shadow's Death Harvest also inflicts Sow. So these really synergize together to cause just a continuous feedback loop of shadows and Sow, and enemies exploding, and everything dying around you, so it's fantastic. Range is quite important because of that, so we have 175 range from the combination of Augur Reach and Stretch. That gives us 175. That's helpful for both having a decent Gloom radius for when you do want to have Gloom on, and for making sure those shadows have enough distance to travel, basically, which is also largely dependent upon duration, not necessarily range, but so the casting range of that and the explosion radius is very dependent upon that, so you want to make sure you have some range. We're using Fleeting Expertise here because we're going to be casting a ton, and the extra ability efficiency helps to offset the negative efficiency from Blind Rage, because we do want to have Blind Rage on here because we want a lot of strength for this build, both for the shadows and for the Pillage armor strip. The negative duration is actually not as bad as it seems. We do want duration for the purpose of the shadows, how long they live, but negative duration is good for Pillage, because if you have a shorter Pillage, then you get your shields back faster, rather than the pulse taking forever to return to you. And keep in mind that our duration, again, actually is going to be positive a lot of the time thanks to multi-efficiency. Whenever we have shields, this will give us 36% duration, which again puts us up to 116 duration, up from 85. Equilibrium is on here because on our companion, which we'll show in a moment, we're using Synth Deconstruct, so all of those health orbs that our companion generates from enemy deaths is going to give us basically all the energy that we need from Equilibrium, along with a few other factors that we'll go over here. So do make sure to keep Gloom on when you're in the mission. If you need the survivability, just keep in mind that it will, of course, be slowing down enemies near you. But that's not really much of a problem because the shadows are going to be killing things in quite a large radius. So that's pretty much the build here. Again, we're using Augmented Efficiency. Those are the Arcanes. Let's go take a look at the... Let's talk about the Companion first. So we're using the Nautilus Prime because, again, this is a full Sevagoth Prime Access loadout. So this is using Sevagoth, Nautilus, Verglas, and the Epitaph Prime. So if you look at the Nautilus here, we're using 3 bond mods. We're using Mystic Bond, Duplex Bond, Manifold Bond. Mystic Bond is really nice because as Nautilus casts its Cordon and Guardian, that will trigger the effective Mystic Bond, basically, where once your Nautilus casts enough abilities, it'll give you a free energy cast. And this will, again, help out with your energy economy on top of Equilibrium. And Equilibrium is going to trigger from Synth Deconstruct. This mod gives enemies that are hit by your companion, so when it's shooting its Verglas, for example, a 25% chance to drop a health orb when they die. So there's going to be quite a bit of health orbs on the ground for Equilibrium to convert into energy. Now, Duplex Bond plus Manifold Bond is a fantastic combination here. Duplex Bond makes it so that whenever you spend 100 energy, you'll generate a clone of your Sentinel, and those clones will go around shooting stuff, which again should count for the condition of Synth Deconstruct. And also, if those clones happen to actually kill stuff, those enemies have a 50% chance of dropping an energy orb. Manifold Bond, the important part about this is that when you kill an enemy that has 3 or more stats effects on them, which is going to be a lot of the enemies that you kill, it'll reduce the companion ability cooldown by 3 seconds, and that's really synergistic with Mystic Bond, because by letting your companion use its abilities more often, you can activate Mystic Bond more often, which means you get better energy economy. And I did not mean to take that mod off. Let's put that back on here. In terms of survivability, at extremely high levels, I don't think any of the shield, armor, health mods really matter. So instead, I go for Accelerated Deflection to give shield regen, to basically just hopefully have your companion survive off of shield gate. Because shield gating is, just like us, is really the only way to survive at higher levels, including for companions. Of course, we have Vacuum on. Of course, we have Primed Animal Instinct on. Primed Regen, all the classics. In terms of the actual preset mods, we're running Guardian, because this will, again, boost the efficacy of your shield gate, especially when paired with Manifold Bond. This will go off. This will activate more often than usual. So when you run out of shields, you'll occasionally just get your shields back for free rather than having to regen from pillage. And Cordon will group enemies close together. And if you recall the fact, like, you know, how the Sevagoth build works, it's a nuking ability build. Every time that your Nautilus groups up enemies into a clump with Cordon, that's an absolutely perfect scenario for using your Reap and Sow combo on Sevagoth to just blow up the entire crowd. Because the more tightly packed the enemies are, the more effective that is, because it'll be overlapping explosion damage. Now let's go take a look at the Epitaph. So the Epitaph in this build, I'm just using it as a primer, so it's not built for damage. That's why it's utility mods. Like we have both the Augur mods on. The Augur Seeker is actually not bad for this build itself because it gives status duration. So if it takes you a moment to get to a kill, they'll still have the viral and heat procs on them and whatnot. But the Augurs are basically on here just for the energy spent on ability converted to shields. Combined with the Augur Reach in the build, we have 120%. So 120% of the energy that I spend will be turned into shield, so that's just a little bit extra shield gate on top. Now we're using a viral heat build, as you can see here, so we'll be priming enemies with viral heat. This priming is really good for the damage of the Sevagoth nuke, because, you know, it's just a straight damage multiplier, so this just further enhances that. Using the Amalgam Barrel Diffusion instead of regular because the extra dodge speed is nice. The reason why I'm not using Galvanized is because since we're not actually getting kills with this weapon, you wouldn't stack up the on-kill multi-shot, so Amalgam Barrel Diffusion actually gives the same amount of multi-shot as Galvanized Diffusion, given that scenario, like not killing enemies, but it also gives the dodge rate. We're using regular Sure Shot instead of Galvanized Shot for the same reason. This gives 10% more status chance than Galvanized Shot, and again, we're not doing damage, and we're not getting kills, so the on-kill condition of Galvanized Shot is irrelevant. The X-List doesn't matter. The really useful thing here on top of the priming is Secondary Fortifier. Secondary Fortifier gives you Overguard every time you shoot an Eximus enemy that has Overguard. So this is another defensive layer, and the fantastic thing about Overguard is that whether you get 1 Overguard or 15,000 Overguard, which is the cap from this arcane, it doesn't matter. If you have any amount of Overguard, you get a 0.5 second Overguard gate when it breaks. So you just have to get any amount of Overguard from shooting an Eximus, and boom, you have an extra half second of invulnerability on top of your shield gate, on top of Gloom and the crowd control from Verglas and all that. Speaking of which, I forgot to go over the Verglas weapon. The weapon for Nautilus here, we're using the Verglas Prime, of course. And we're using a radiation gas cold build. The reason we're doing that is to make sure that we easily trigger the condition of manifold bond, which requires 3 statuses. So even if we aren't shooting ourselves, or if we aren't applying any statuses, your companion alone can trigger its own bond mod. So the cold is the most important here, since we're using Prime to Cry rounds and Rhyme rounds to make sure cold has the highest weighting. We're also using Shivering Contagion. This is absolutely incredible. Shivering Contagion plus massive cold weighting plus massive status chance plus 90% fire rate from vital acceleration and the multi-shot from split chamber, of course, means you're going to be putting out a shitload of cold procs and instantly freezing everything around you that's not an Eximus, basically. The radiation will also be more crowd control, because when you rad proc enemies, they'll start fighting each other. And yeah, it's just incredible. So there's the Verglas build. So that's all of the Prime Access builds here. No, it's not, because we have Shadows and Claws. Let's go over that. So the Shadow here, I went a little overkill, and I put on 2 Umbra Forma. You really don't need to do this. I went just a full health tank build. Honestly, at super high levels, may not actually work great. You'll still probably get 1-shot, so I would say maybe replace Adaptation with Rolling Guard. And that way, if you go into your down mode as your Shadow, you can utilize Rolling Guard to dash and get some invulnerability, and then swiftly go into trying to get those kills you need to revive. That is an option. But for lower to mid-level or base Steel Path content, for example, this super health tank setup would be fine. Obviously, we have a ton of armor and a ton of health from running triple Umbral on top of the 90% adaptation DR. And we're also running Guardian of the Grey, so again, I'm just going like full investment, super health tank to just try to have that burst of tankiness while I quickly get the 5 kills needed to revive. Preparation is a good idea. A viewer in my stream actually brought this up. You could use Preparation, that way when you do pop into your Shadow, you have max energy, so that's very convenient. For the Claws here, it's just a basic corrosive crit damage build. I can't even fit a Tennokai mod up here on this build unless I were to use a Umbra Forma, which I'm not really willing to do on the melee. So there's no Tennokai mod equipped, but you could have one depending on your setup, how expensive your mods are, or if you were willing to use an Umbra Forma and then polarize the Tennokai as well, potentially. But yeah, this is just a generic, like I say, corrosive crit setup. So that's the breakdown. We have the Praetos on, not for actual meleeing, just for the sprint speed and the parkour velocity, just so we can move around easily as need be. We're not really meleeing with it, though. But yeah, there's the setup. Let's go ahead and hop into... We're going to toss things up a bit today. We're going to do Conjunction Survival on Steel Path, of course, instead of Akuva Survival, because it starts higher. It's around level 200. We'll hop into there, and we will see how this build performs. There did happen to be a Fisher missing, so that's excellent. I will say I am also using the Tenet Glaxion. In fact, I think I cut myself off there. In fact, let's show that real quick. That's what I just said. So you can use this weapon alongside this build because of Photon Overcharger. So this will be even more energy orbs. I just forgot to mention this and just realized it when I loaded into the mission here. This is pretty much just my standard setup for this weapon. So Photon Overcharger instead of Vital Sense, essentially. Aside from that, it's a fairly regular build. This will make it so that a lot of the enemies you freeze and kill will have extra energy orb drops, which is, of course, just going to help with the energy economy more. And it'll also do way more damage than usual on this build, because the extra crit chance from Shadow Haze works like Avenger. It's flat crit chance, so you can literally red crit against enemies that are affected by this using the Glaxion, where it usually doesn't even always do a regular crit. So it's an extreme power increase. Anyways, back into the mission. It is always nice when there's a Fisher up while you're doing this. There's that cordon going off, grouping up those guys. Oh, they're just gonna take my guns like that? It's crazy.
The Orican Neural Sentry is attempting to purge you from this place. Stand by for life support.
Alright, here come the enemies. Here we go. Alright, check out how good this is against a crowd of enemies.
Look out for reactors.
Very good. And it just keeps on going, as you can see. We can pop that pillage for that armor strip. And you see when we go down here, you don't actually die as Sevagoth. You go into your shadow mode. And if you just get enough of those consume kills, you get right back up. So you don't actually have to die. Where is my Glaxion? They stole it again. Let's go ahead and get some kills with that. Turn on our gloom here.
All manner of Oregon technology may work here due to the Circulus's proximity.
Man, how many gun stealing guys are here, bro? That's crazy.
You may use it.
You see, even with all that downtime there and grabbing my guns and whatnot, still got over 100 kills in the first minute. It's quite a fun build to use, to just ability nuke almost purely on a Warframe. Of course, you can definitely supplement it with your guns, or supplement it with priming and whatnot, or the Glaxion if you need energy back, but in terms of the capable damage output of just the ability itself, it's nice to actually be able to do that. See that red crit? You can orange and red crit with your Glaxion against guys that are affected by that augment mod. It's insane how much better the weapon is on this build. Now, one note about Pillage that I will say is the armor strip from Pillage, or any ability source armor for that matter, is additive with corrosive projection. That's why we have corrosive projection on. So if you get to 328% strength, that gives you a 82% armor strip Pillage. Now this build doesn't hit that high of strength. It hits 259% strength with Multi-Augmented stacked up all the way, but 259 times 1.28 from a Nidus Spectre, giving you a multiplicative 28% strength increase, is 331. So if you wanted to, you could put down a Nidus Spectre and get full armor strip from your Pillage cast, and that would of course be another damage increase to make sure that no matter the enemy level, they have absolutely no armor, which is, at higher levels, it's basically a 10 times damage multiplier because your armor cap is 2700, which is 90% damage reduction. Yeah, as you can see here, once the build gets going, it was a little rough at the start there, but once it gets going, it really goes pretty hard. Let's turn Gloom back on here. You can also use Matter Eye and do that double dash for the extra 40% strength and casting speed. That's a lot of red crits right there. It does pretty good against Acolytes too. We'll show that when they spawn in. Especially because the crit chance bonus from the augment also applies to Acolytes, because you can put the SO effect on them. Like there's some sentience coming in here. And again, you can use the Epitaph to prime viral, and also get that free overguard for another defensive layer. So it serves a dual purpose on this setup. I don't even know if the sentient spawned in yet. I've died already.
They know you're here. Prepare for sentient.
Ah, no, here they come. Now they're on the way. You can see the Tenant Glaxion really does help supplement the casting cost of this build. I do recommend it. Another thing you can do if you want to get a lot more efficiency back is you can switch from Blind Rage to Transient Fortitude. That will, of course, heavily reduce the cost of casting at the cost of a little bit more negative duration.
Tenno, the Void has summoned a new presence and it craves our life support.
We got some
Destroy
fracs.
these manifestations.
Go ahead and kill those guys real quick. But yeah, I mean, you can see the build definitely works. As long as you keep your energy up, you really don't have any survivability issues, thanks to Pillage and Gloom. You will, of course, occasionally, as you've seen, bottom out on energy, but between your Sentinel giving, basically activating Equilibrium for you, as well as your Glaxion, if you use that, giving you energy back, it's really not too hard to get going again. Watch out for that Acolyte here. Go ahead and put Sow on him so we can get that crit chance buff. There we go. Yeah, we like seeing those red crits. It's a good crowd over here to blow up, it looks like. Yep, once you get a crowd like that grouped up, it's absolutely insane how effective this is. Especially in the Fisher mission, if you get that double range and double strength corruption. Oh man, that'll be the best 2 minutes of your life. The damage increase and the explosion rate increase is absolutely absurd when that occurs. Alright, good stuff. Let's go ahead and hop out of here. There's the Sevagoth Prime Access loadout setup. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. I think it's an interesting build. I definitely do enjoy the overlapping layers of, defense from the crowd control of Gloom, the overguard generation from secondary fortifier, things like that. Again, I love having a build that can actually just ability nuke. There's not a lot of frames that can actually scale super far into Steel Path with just their ability damage, but due to the health scaling nature of the Sow explosions, Sevagoth is one of the frames that can thankfully do that. So if you enjoyed this build, consider dropping a sub if you haven't already. Like the video, perhaps. It means a lot, definitely helps the channel. I appreciate all you guys as always, and I'll see you in the next one.